Good evening, everyone. My name is Dan, and on behalf of Book Soup, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for our virtual event with Dawnie Walton in conversation with Taylor Jenkins Reid, discussing the final revival of Opal and Nev. For regular updates on upcoming events, please feel free to subscribe to our email newsletter. This evening's virtual event will end with a Q&A. To submit a question, please use the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. If you see a question on the list that you like for our speakers to answer, please click the like button and we will try to get as many questions as time will allow. Also, please consider supporting Book Soup and Dawnie Walton and Taylor Jenkins Reid by purchasing a copy of today's featured book. Just click the green button at the center of your screen, lower center of your screen. The link will redirect to our website where you can continue your checkout process. And now a few words about our featured guests. Taylor Jenkins Reid is the New York Times bestselling author of 7 novels, including Daisy Jones and the Six, and The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, which I love that book so much. Don't get me started.
That means a lot to me, Dan.
I love Evelyn Hugo. She's amazing. She lives in Los Angeles with her husband and daughter, and her new novel, Malibu Rising, will be published in June. Dawnie Walton is the author of tonight's featured novel, The Final Revival of Opal and Nev, which Publishers Weekly, in a starred review, calls a spectacular debut. It has been named one of 2021's most anticipated books by Essence, Vogue, The Oprah Magazine, Elle, The Independent, LitHub, Pop Sugar, The Millions, and Hype Bay. Her work as a fiction writer and journalist explores identity, place, and influence of pop culture. A MacDowell Colony Fellow, a Tin House Scholar, and a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop, she has worked as an executive-level editor for magazine and multimedia brands, including Essence, Entertainment Weekly, Getty Images, and Life. A native of Jacksonville, Florida, she lives in Brooklyn. And now, without further ado, I'm going to close my window and turn things over to Taylor Jenkins Reid and Dawnie Walton.
Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.
So, Dawnie, you're going to read for us, right?
Yes,
Right.
I would love to read. And first, everybody, thank you so much for being here. I am absolutely thrilled to be here with Taylor. As I wrote Taylor in a letter, you know, I feel like our books are in conversation just naturally. So this is a dream that it's actually happening. So The Final Revival of Opal and Nev is a fictional oral history about an interracial rock and roll duo, a Black American woman, Opal Jewell, and a white Englishman, Neville Charles. And they make weird rock and roll together in early 1970s New York. And this book traces their rise, their fall, and the dark secret that comes to light when they consider reuniting for a tour in 2016. So the part that I'm going to read is from chapter 6, and it is sort of the moment when Nev first sees Opal in an amateur sister act in Detroit. And I do want to ask Taylor later how she handled readings, because I've been practicing my voices in oral history. So we'll see how this one
goes. You're more talented
goes.
at it than me. It's not easy. I've got your work cut out for you, but I believe in you.
We'll see how this goes. Opal Jewell. Pearl was sanctified, but I take credit for bringing out the devil in her. She was in church every Sunday, singing it up to Jesus, but on Saturday nights, I'd twist her arm to come out with me to this joint called the Gemini. I'd play on her guilt by telling her I was going with or without her, and didn't she want to keep her only sister out of trouble? Worked every time, mostly because deep down I think she wanted it to work, but Sister Pearl would never admit that. The Gemini had an open mic hour with a live backing band, and that's how we got on. Pearl would refuse to sing anything fun. For some reason, she hated the word baby. She thought it was too worldly or some nonsense. So that knocked out a lot of the Motown hits right there. And honey, this was 1969, 1970 Detroit. I was trying to meet Mr. Berry Gordy. It was very reasonable that one day he would walk into the Gemini looking for his next starlets. And we're up there singing Christmas carols. But I always meant for it to be Pearl. I really did. She had the voice. I was just the backup. What I brought to it was the style. I tried to make her stand out, tried to teach her to sway a little with the beat, and I did her outfits. Mine was always the shorter, tighter, lower cut version of hers, even though, to tell you the truth, Pearl had a lot more to work with, if you know what I'm saying. Howie Kelly. Christ, that one had a rack. You didn't know whether you were hypnotized by the voice or the tits. Pearl Wellmont. During the time we were singing at the Gemini, I was still in touch with Lawrence back in Alabama, and we had already promised ourselves to each other. I had no interest in getting ogled by the men in that filthy place. Most of them were married anyway, but I was working and saving money till it seemed right to move to Birmingham for good. And to be honest, I was also trying to keep Opal out of trouble. And by trouble, that's exactly the kind of trouble I mean. You would not believe how many of our old classmates, the girls from Mrs. Dennis's apartment, ended up in that situation with no husband. Opal didn't have any friends, and she looked more mature than she was. Without me to look out for her, she might have been susceptible to a certain kind of wicked attention. That sinning lifestyle can be seductive. So I tried to keep up with her as much as she'd let me, and if that meant wearing those outfits she made for Saturday nights, well, I'd humor it, long as I was covered enough. Neville Charles. Howie and I were sitting at a table right in front. It wasn't a big place, and every other inconspicuous spot was taken. We sat through a couple of ho-hum acts, a guy struggling his way through Sam and Dave, and then the bassist and the drummer kicked in with To Sir with Love of all songs, and the Robinson Girls came out. Howie Kelly, the Coca-Cola bottle and the straw. Opal Jewel. That night, Pearl and I were wearing crushed velvet, gold crushed velvet, or maybe velour. Honey, I don't know, whichever one of those is the cheaper fabric. I'd made Pearl a jumpsuit out of it with a top that I tried to keep fitted so that people could see she had something. And out of the same material, I'd cut myself a halter and shorts. And I took a brass chain from an old pocket watch I found at the Goodwill, and I shined it up nice and wrapped it around my skinny little waist like a belt, trying to create some kind of effect. Now, To Sir with Love was mid-tempo, but me being me, I'd still find a way to shake it, you know, so that right on beat, that chain would jingle like mad, as Nev would say. Howie Kelly. She had this deep ebony skin, so any colors looked dramatic on her. I'll give her that. And it was like music every time she moved. You just wanted to stick a tambourine in her hand and watch her go. Opal Jewel. For years, Pearl had adored To Sir with Love. I mean, everybody was crazy about the movie because Sidney Poitier was so damn fine, and the sentiment of it was very sweet and chaste. But don't let that sweetness fool you. That's a belter song, a big chance to show out, and Pearl used to beat it dead. You remember, though, that on the original track, Lulu doesn't have any backing vocals, so I had to make up my own part, get in where I fit in. And when I listened to that record, I realized that a big part of it, what gave it emotion and light and air, was the strings. Now, at the Gemini, there was obviously nobody with a damn violin in the house band. So I figured, well, then that's my part. I'm the strings. Pearl would go loud and broad, just like Lulu, and I'd fill in high above her, floating real soft and pretty, like painting those letters in the sky. Neville Charles. It's really a sappy tune, but by the chorus, I was riveted. My God. And the thing besides her singing that I remember the most was her hair. It was blue, black, and shiny, and obviously fake, and it fell down to her midriff. She was very energetic and moved a lot, and it would sort of shift around on her head. Opal Jewel, studying an old family photo. Woo, child, those early days of me and the wigs, looking like a vinyl record had melted on top of my head. Neville Charles. I remember watching her, absolutely gobsmacked, and thinking how mysterious and scrappy she was. This girl in the gold shorts and the bad wig making up her own part. This girl with the voice that flew over and through and around her sister so strangely. Howie Kelly. At the end of it, I go through the whole rigmarole with Nev, me asking him, did you like her? This time his face looked different though, all lit up and excited. He didn't have to say a word. I was already gesturing toward the Coke bottle when Nev slapped my hand down and pointed to the straw. Thank you.
You nailed that.
Oh, good.
That was great.
I got to.
You embodied those people. Well done.
Thank
done.
you. Thank you.
It obviously, people that have not read this book, what they're learning now is that this is written like a fictional oral history, which in my opinion is a great way to tell a novel. And there are a lot of similarities between the final revival of Opal and Nev and my book Daisy Jones and the Six. And I think all of that goes to prove that if anyone out there read Daisy Jones and liked it, you're going to love the final revival of Opal and Nev. But I think there's a lot of things about our books that once you look past the surface are very different. And you have managed to capture something really, really special and very, very important in this novel that I would guess people just looking at the cover and the very brief description might not understand the level of gravitas that this book has. So I want to get into some of that so that people know just how special it is. So I oftentimes, when I was promoting Daisy Jones, it felt like if we're really, really boiling it down, it's Fleetwood Mac, but it's not Fleetwood Mac. It's a band in the 70s and everybody's sleeping together was basically my idea. If we're really, really going to boil yours down and reduce it to something that doesn't hold all of the shades of how complex it is, this feels like it's the Altamont riot, but it's not. And for those who don't know or aren't familiar, in 1969, there was a riot at a music festival called Altamont. It was started by the Hells Angels. There was a black man that was stabbed to death while the Rolling Stones were playing. And it was, a dark time in music history, a fascinating thing to explore. And so my first question is, what drew you to telling a story about essentially what you've now made a fictional murder of a black man at a rock show in the 60s and 70s? What first drew you to that idea?
Well, what first drew it to me was honestly my love for rock and roll music. Since I was a teenager growing up in North Florida. I'm from Jacksonville, which is the hometown of Leonard Skinner, if anybody from Jacksonville is in the house. Very complicated legacy, which I'm sure we'll get into in a bit. But I wrote it because my relationship with rock and roll was a complicated one because I loved it. And yet I never saw, or I rarely saw myself reflected in it. And that became very difficult in terms of my identity, because it was like, well, if I love this music and I'm not in it, what does that mean? Or does it love me back, And so, I was thinking about the kind of rock and roll hero that I would have loved to put up on my bedroom wall, right? And so that's kind of how Opal was born, was thinking about, a figure who for me would be as sort of bold and wild and cool and messy as all those rock stars that I love. But she also loves the skin that she's in. Like, she has no confusion about who she is or what she has to offer the world,
Mm-hmm.
And that would have been someone that I greatly admired. And then I was thinking, well, how would she cope with this world that is really overwhelmingly white? What would it be like for her? And who would she find as her allies in this world? And that's how I was thinking about her bond with Jimmy, also who Jimmy is their drummer. Jimmy is the character who is sort of killed at this climactic concert. And he also is Opal's lover for a time. And I was thinking about how they would be drawn to each other simply because they were Black, And I was also thinking about bringing in real life history. And that's kind of where I was thinking about Altamont and other sort of like, the late 60s, early 70s was such a kind of chaotic time in American history where things were really sort of changing the music, you know, as you know, like there were so many different forms of rock and roll sort of like happening. You know, of course, there was the whole LA scene, Laurel Canyon, but this is like proto-punk era before CBGBs and like, you know, sort of still the heyday of Max's Kansas City and all of these things. So I was thinking about all these kind of like bold forces clashing, you know, and all these very different forms of music and attitudes. Like I wanted to put them in one place. And so that's how the concert idea came together. And yeah, the biker thing was part Altamont, but also because I used to work at Life magazine, and there's sort of this iconic photo essay by Bill Epridge, I think it is, or maybe Bill Ray did sort of a photo essay about biker gangs. Oh, cool. And they were always like, so kind of like grizzled guys and kind of like a little terrifying. And some of them would cover their, you know, faces for the camera because they had records or they had like warrants, you know. And so like a lot of the characters and the ideas I were playing with was like based on imagery, you know. And so that's how like the bikers came into it as another kind of opposing force to Opal.
Well, you do a really wonderful job of, I'm just going to open my shades a little bit more. You do a really beautiful job of putting a number of different tensions at play within one moment. And yes, this is an oral history of a band, and you're learning how Nev and Opal got together to start making music and what happened to them after the riot. But really the heart of this story is what happens at this riot. And telling a riot, the story of a riot from an oral history in an oral history format is really, really smart, because what you've created is so many different things happening at once. And you've shown us those things and you've made them come to life so vividly that we can start to understand how something starts at a simmer and really does boil over.
Thank you.
I have a lot of questions about Opal because she is such a special character. She really crackles on the page. She's fascinating and complicated. But before we get into Opal and Jimmy specifically, I want to hear you talk about what you had just mentioned at the top about loving rock but not seeing yourself represented in it, because you also make a really in the novel, and I'd love to hear more about your thoughts on this as well. But, you know, Black musicians in rock have always occupied a really tenuous space. And in addition to the fact that, like, you know, white supremacy makes it difficult for them to actually express themselves and be treated the way that they should. And Opal and Jimmy both deal with that in different ways that we'll get into that are really just very well rendered. Rock is also an American art form based on really an African-American art form.
Oh yeah. Based in the church, based in the blues.
Yeah.
Like that's where rock is from.
White people stole it and then excluded Black people from it. Like often white people do. But you make a distinction here between British rock and American rock. And Neville Charles is a British rock musician. And what I thought was really interesting, and I'd love to hear you talk about, is one, what felt like the right time, or why were you ready to tackle finally in your art, the tenuous position of being a Black person in rock music? That's my first question. And second of all, do you think there's a difference between those subcultures of American rock and British rock?
Yeah. So I think in different ways, like this is a story I've been trying to get out of me for years. And I had tried it in different forms. I tried little short stories, you know, and nothing really like grabbed me until I had this moment at the end of 2013. And I was watching 20 Feet from Stardom, which is this documentary, fantastic documentary
yes,
about the unsung, mostly women, mostly Black women,
Mm-hmm.
who made rock and roll history by sort of, providing backing vocals and inspiration to a gang of artists, from the Rolling Stones to, Sting, Bruce Springsteen, like Talking Heads. And on the note of Talking Heads, at the 5 minutes into 20 Feet from Stardom, there is concert footage from Stop Making Sense, which is probably like one of my favorite concert films. I love Talking Heads, always have. And you see David Byrne, who I love, doing his like David Byrne dancing. But then to the left, you see his background singers, who are these two amazing Black women who are so joyously carefree and committed to this music, and just as kind of like weird as he is in a way. And I would later find out, because I didn't know at the time, of course, what their names were. And their names are Lynn Mabry and Edna Holt. But in that moment, I felt like I literally wanted to like stick my hand in the screen and pull one of them to center stage, right? So it was that image that really captured me, of these sort of two weirdos and them sort of sharing the spotlight, not one backing the other, but in a partnership. And wondering all these questions, what if questions, what would have to happen to bring them together? And what if they made music in New York City in this era of music that I think is really interesting? And what would have to happen to make them famous? What would have to happen to make them palatable to a record label? And how long could they possibly last? And so it started like with all of these sort of questions and this noodling. And it started just going from there. Yeah.
You explore that so well, and you give Opal such a great opportunity to shine. I mean, she's such a person that it feels like there was only one way for her life to go, and it had to be this. But getting into the specifics of her, because she's such an interesting person and she's very complicated. At the very beginning of her story, it's not just her. It's her and her sister. And her sister appears to be the more conventionally talented one, maybe even the more conventionally attractive one. But there are very great, solid reasons that you've given within the text why Opal is just sort of born to be a star. And can you tell us a little bit about how she came to you, how those pieces of her came into your mind?
So I always knew that I wanted Opal to be a little strange. The concept was always like I wanted two very kind of people who were a bit awkward, a bit outcast, to find some magic in the music that they were making together. And so when I was thinking of, real life people, I was thinking about women who were very bold and confident in that strangeness, because I wanted her to have that confidence. So I was thinking about three different women, really. I was thinking about Grace Jones from a style perspective, and from a don't give a F, I don't know if we could curse on here, like perspective. And from just like, she's going to stomp on that stage and give it to you. Like, I was thinking of her. I was thinking of sort of a cult funk figure named Betty Davis, who was on the New York scene in the 1970s. She was a model and a songwriter, and she would hang out with Jimi Hendrix, and she was married for one very brief and tumultuous year to Miles Davis. And she is the artist that they credit with kind of like electrifying his sound. And she went on to make several really amazing, sexy albums. And she had an electric stage show where she would come out in lingerie and fishnets. And it was very shocking at the time. But her record labels were very much like trying to change her all the time. And she didn't want to change. And so she just said, well, forget it, I'm out. And she left the industry and she went back to her hometown of Pittsburgh. And she lives there today, as far as I know, as a recluse. And she sort of had her limit and she knew very clearly what kind of artist she wanted to be. And she was not going to compromise. So that's the Betty Davis in her.
That's cool.
And the third was actually, I had the pleasure of doing an event with last night, and that is Nona Hendricks of LaBelle, who is an endlessly creative artist, always sort of pushing the envelope, writing songs for LaBelle and for her solo career later that were incredibly political and incredibly conscious. Songs about the environment and about racism and all of these things. And so I wanted to add that political element to her as well. So these are the things I'm thinking about, but there's all kinds of pieces of so many different women in Opal that I wanted to weave into her. And
it feels that way. You can't track her to one particular star. And that's, I think, what you've done so brilliantly is that she's got a little bit of this and a little bit of this, and you can see elements. Yeah. You've created something hugely original and unique. So let's talk about Opal as a fashion icon.
Yeah.
LaFleur, who's her costume designer, great character. Talk to us about their partnership and how Opal presents herself to the world.
Yeah. So Opal first comes to New York sort of full of attitude, but no idea what she's doing. Nev sees her in the Detroit bar and, has Howie sign her to a contract, but she's never recorded before. She's never done anything before. And she decides that she wants to move to Harlem because she's lived around Black people her whole life. And that's how she feels most comfortable. And so she rents a room in this house, and Virgil LaFleur is the boarder in the upstairs apartment. And they become very close. They sort of hang out on the downtown scene a bit. They go to parties and art shows. And he also, he discovers that she actually is very naive and has no idea what she's doing. And he's like, oh, honey, you need to look the part, basically. So we're going to get your look together, and then you go in and you'll figure it out. And that's how their collaboration sort of starts. He makes this this crazy rainbow dress for her because the album that they're going to be recording is called Polychrome. And, at the point that she moves to New York, Opal has alopecia, which is another thing that sort of makes her kind of an outsider among kids when she's growing up. But she hasn't yet done anything about that. So when, she decides she's going to shave her head, and she goes into the studio in this wild getup and this bald head. And it's just kind of very shocking, but amazing and very confident. And so from then on, she sort of sees fashion. She calls her clothes her armor. And that's how she goes into every situation. And so I do pay a lot of attention to what she's wearing in the most pivotal scenes, the concert scene and then the festival scene that's at the end. It's all very important because it sort of is setting up how she's feeling when she goes out to face that audience and face the world.
That the attention that you pay to that really shows. And there are multiple scenes where the descriptions of what she's wearing and because the outfits themselves are so wild, it's all just very vivid and very fun to imagine yourself in the presence of this woman who has such stage presence, but also is wearing these fantastical things, which.
Yeah. And it's really fun to think about her on the streets, even when she didn't have a show, Virgil would make her these crazy things and it was very sort of DIY in the way that the New York scene felt really DIY, and punk feels DIY. So they'd go to Goodwill and he'd buy a wooden salad bowl and put a fan on the side of it and a chin strap. So it's a hat, or make a purse out of a stuffed animal, all kinds of crazy things. And she just loves freaking people out. She loves it.
Well, and there's a lot of power in it too, which she harnesses so well powerfully. Let's talk a little bit about Jimmy, because Opal is the main character. Opal is the one who we're always drawn to, but Jimmy is really the inciting incident of all of it. It's why the book is being written. Jimmy's daughter is the one who begins this investigation and gets everybody together. His death is the thing that, really rockets Opal to fame in some ways, as complicated as a feeling she has about it. So let's talk about Jimmy. He's a Black musician in a mostly white band. You can tell throughout the text, this is a situation he finds himself in a lot. He and Opal have this really touching and tender connection, but it is also very much based on, like you were saying, there are two Black people in the world of white rock. So who is he based on? Are there people that you wanted to pay homage to, that you wanted to honor? Who is Jimmy to you?
It's funny when we were talking about this a little in the green room, and I don't know if there was anyone. I think, again, it's a situation of like different pieces of people. Of course, like there's a bit of the sensibility of a Jimi Hendrix a little bit, but sort of, Jimmy's a bit taciturn. So there's like some Miles Davis in there. Like he is like, I'm going to come in, I'm going to play the song like, I'm going to play it amazingly, but when it's done, and I'm out of here, And so when Opal comes in, she's so different from sort of this alienating scene that he's in. And he's just super drawn to her. And, I have this moment where Opal and Nev's producer is sort of talking about the making of their first record. And what everyone remembers about Jimmy is his laugh, which is sort of this sort of choked kind of like thing that you almost have to pull out of him, And he recalls that like Jimmy starts like making that like little curious noise more and more when Opal is around, because it's almost like she's releasing some pressure valve within him. And but it's a complicated relationship because Jimmy is married.
Yeah, and he's much older than her too. Opal is very young when this starts, and Jimmy is very young, more of his life, and has more awareness about how things go.
Yeah. So the journalist character, is Jimmy's daughter. She is the one who, as you said, like kicks off the story. But, of course, her family, her mother has very complicated feelings.
Sure.
Toward, as the sort of scorned wife, who basically, not to give too much away, but is killed because of something that Opal does, And so Sunny kind of grows up with like fascinated by Opal, but it's like a taboo for her to love it. So she feels like it's contraband, she keeps their album under her bed and it's very secretive, but she's fascinated by this woman because it's a connection to the father that she never met. And so that's why she wants to tell the stories, because she wants to sort of get closer to this man who she doesn't really know, and nobody will really talk to her about it. Her own family won't talk to her because they're still sort of angry about everything that went down.
And there are certainly no easy answers, and everyone is compromised in some way. So let's talk a little bit about Sunny. Her name when she was born is Sarah Lena. Yes. She goes by Sunny. Professionally, I guess we could call her either. What do you like to call her?
Yeah. I'll call her Sunny.
Okay.
It's the name that she chooses for herself. Yeah.
Right. So we'll call her Sunny. So Sunny is a journalist. She's a rock journalist. She tells you right up front, this is a story that she thought she would never tell, because she's so involved in it. But something overtakes her. She feels like now is the time, and she wants to dive into this. So how did you come up with Sunny, and how did the process of, Sunny as a character being the author within the book itself takes on a large amount of heft within the novel by the end of it. And so tell us a little bit about how you came to her and also the decision to have her play as big of a role as she plays.
So it's really, really funny. People are often surprised. But Sunny was a very late addition to this novel. I had probably written about 2/3 of a full draft that was just a straight oral history by the time I went to my MFA program, actually. And in my first workshop, my classmates told me, they said, we think this is like really exciting. We really love it. But we're really curious about who these people are talking to, like who is receiving this information, who's curating the story, who's putting it together. And I thought, wow, yeah, that would be a really interesting way to kind of complicate the story, to have a character who we know is in a more present day timeline, like clearly. And then I thought, it would be even cooler if she had some kind of personal connection. And so in that draft that I had before, there was one little paragraph where it was from like a character, I don't know what I had named her, something else, something different. But she was talking about how Opal Jewel had an affair with her father and sort of like ruined their relationship. But as sort of a way to say she was sorry for that, she paid for her education. And so she was grateful to her in that way. And I thought there was something in that was really, really interesting. And so that was the character that I decided to pull out and to be the filter for all these histories, the person that everyone else would be giving their confessions to. And I forgot the second part of your question.
I did too. I was listening to your answer. You answered it. I was saying, by the end of the novel, she takes up so much of the story. We're really deeply invested in Sunny and her finding the answers. And so I'm actually curious, writer to writer, if the first draft didn't have that such propulsiveness to this novel, it must have felt like a real tea once you found that.
So it was. And actually the thing about it was that Sunny and the 2016 timeline kind of go hand in hand, And so I didn't really have that kind of like propulsive, like leading towards something happening in 2016 in that early draft. But when Sunny came in, I thought, well, this is an opportunity since I have a character. We can see everyone else, both younger and older, and maybe we can make something happen on this present day storyline, which is them considering a reunion tour at this festival called Daring Do. Also, what happened was, I was writing all this in Iowa in 2016, my first semester, and Trump was elected. And that changed the trajectory of a lot of things in the story. I mean, there was already, the riot was already in the story. The Confederate flag was already in the story. The Bond brothers were in the story. But as I was processing everything that was happening in the news and sort of seeing parallels between the time period I was writing about and the moment that I was writing it, and I sort of wanted to sort of use Sunny as a way to clarify that and to sort of take us through both of those timelines and end how I ended in 2016. No spoilers.
Yeah. Well, it's really well executed, and I don't want to give too much away, but you do a really beautiful job of using the complexity of rock and roll to shine a light on the many faces, the hydra that is white supremacy. And this riot is a result of a lot of different white people making certain decisions that benefit themselves in a number of different ways. And, you have Chet Bond, who people, when they read the book, will see, there's plenty of people on the national stage now who unfortunately are behaving much like someone like Chet Bond was in the 70s. You have Halle Kelly, who's the producer, who's, you know, there's a lot of complexity there. But I want to talk about Nev Charles, our last character to really dive into before I start asking you about music and stuff. He's a complicated guy.
He is.
And he's probably the best example within the text of how often we need to be questioning stories based on who's telling them.
Right.
And so talk to us a little bit about how you came up with Nev Charles, this redheaded, green-eyed British, you know, kind of like an Ed Sheeran vibe at first, but then he becomes kind of like a punk rocker, and then he becomes kind of like Billy Joel. I'm just fascinated by his.
I'm so glad that you described it that way, because thinking about Nev as a chameleon was really key to understanding his character. So I was thinking about chameleonic figures, and there are many of them in rock. You know, I mean, I have to say, like, white men have the privilege to change their sound, change their style, experiment, try different things, and
take other people's style or sound. Yeah.
Like, the labels will allow them to do it, and it will go over fine. The same would not be true for Opal, you know, who often describes herself as feeling in a box, you know. But so thinking about, you know, and I will say that Nev is a character that sort of morphed and evolved for me the most as I was writing him. And as I was thinking about what would it really mean, like really behind the scenes, for someone to be a chameleon like this, to have sort of a level of ambition where they're always like kind of shifting a little bit with the styles and the times, you know? So I was thinking about that because honestly, he started as sort of just like an affable, goofy, charming character, you know, and I didn't quite know where he was going. But as I started sort of just like noodling a bit on that chameleon thing, that's when he started to kind of morph and change.
I won't make you say anything more because I think he's such an interesting character and he's so well rendered. And his complex, I mean, people are complex and so is he. And so we'll hope people are enticed and then they start reading. But let's talk about sound. Like, what do they sound like? Nev, when he starts out, has like a folk kind of vibe. And then when Opal, it gets a little bit harder. It goes a little more, what was feeling like, maybe it was like Tina Turner vibes, but then they go punk. So like, just tell and don't leave out what Weird O the album sounds like, because I'm fascinated. So just take us on a musical journey.
So really, when, you know, I think like writing about music, and I know you know this, is so hard. Like, I don't know if you're a musician yourself. I'm not. I took like some disastrous piano lessons as a kid. It did not go well. But I was really thinking about lyrics first. So the sound sort of followed the lyrics. The sound followed the content. So I was thinking about, you know, when they come into this, they're kind of just like playing around a little bit. They're making music that sounds like what would be typical for the day. There's maybe some Vietnam protest music in there, you know, there's some folky stuff. And then the showcase happens, and it is so sort of traumatic that the music becomes like more cathartic. It becomes harder. It becomes like angrier, edgier. And so the music sort of hardens that way. And Opal is the driving force for that. And when they break apart, I think Nev is wanting to get away from that. He wants to sort of go back to something that feels more comfortable, more, you know, easier. Whereas Opal is sort of pushing in that direction because, you know, it is unique and it's sort of avant-garde. Like I always sort of thought of her as a character that was ahead of her time, always like slightly ahead of things. So never quite hitting, you know? And so I always wanted it to be like that. So there is a Spotify playlist.
Great. So where can we find it? Because I want to listen.
Yes, go to Spotify and search. It's just called Opal and Nev playlist.
Great.
And it has artists from both the 70s, but also contemporary artists that I feel like would have been influenced by Opal and Nev, both together and solo.
That's great. And does it have things that when I hear it, I'll be like, oh, this must be Opal's album that nobody can get into because it's so like hard and esoteric.
Somebody put it in the chat. Yeah. So Weirdo, you mentioned. So Weirdo is Opal's solo album that is shelved for a while before it finally comes out, you know, with no support really from the label. And it's sort of like, you know, loud and like not really, you know, Opal doesn't have a pretty voice. She has an arresting voice. And so I'm trying to think if there's anything on the playlist. Like I would think like it's more like pure punk, like X-Ray Specs, things like that. You know, Polystyrene, who is an amazing artist, but also is not a typical kind of vocalist.
Yeah.
Sounds like that.
You're right. I don't remember which character said it, but I think it was maybe somebody at the festival at the end, like one of the concert goers, but just saying, you know, there are so many different art forms that maybe are very challenging to get into, but when a man puts them forth, then if you get into it and you take the time to really start to understand it, then you're super cool. Your taste is like so much better than everybody else. But if a woman puts it forth, it's like, it's weird.
It's screechy. It's, you know, it's off-putting. It's, totally.
We're not challenged to really engage with art as much when it's a woman. It's so much easier to dismiss, especially if it's a Black woman.
Especially if it's a Black woman, because it's always a categorization happening. And it's like, wait, you're not doing like R&B, you're not doing gospel, you're not doing like, what is this? We don't know what to do with this. Like,
but let's just
do that.
Shut down and just you know, move it out of the way. Yeah, I was reading it, I was like, I want to hear Weirdo. I probably wouldn't like it. I'd probably like, this is noise, but I just want to hear it.
Yeah, but it would be interesting, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. It would be interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to be listening to the playlist. People have put the links here. Thank you guys for doing that. So let's talk a little bit, because we want to get to audience questions soon, but I have a few more that I want some answers to, which is, you have a lot of real celebrities that you put in here. And I want to know why you chose those celebrities. That's the first question. And we're talking about, you have like Dick Cavett, you have Quentin Tarantino, executed perfectly, like, and also you have one of my queens, Jane Fonda, who I'm just...
Yes, we stand Jane Fonda.
I'm embarrassed that this is true, but I'm also not embarrassed this is true. I have a sweatsuit that says Jane Fonda down the sides and down the legs.
My friend Lisa Thompson Spires, the author of Heads of the Colored People, also has that same jumpsuit. It's so cute.
I have it in gray and blue. My husband bought me both. And it fits exactly like you would think Jane Fonda sweatpants will fit, which is they're made for somebody much, much thinner than me and much, much taller. They're like up to here and like snug tight. So how did you choose the celebrities that you chose? Let's start there.
Well, you know, I love Jane Fonda. And the moment that I have Jane Fonda in the book, she is being very Jane Fonda, very smart.
Yes.
Very like, and it's so funny, you know, watching her when she was giving her speech for the Lifetime Achievement Award, I was like, yep. She's always great. She's always on it. Like,
yes,
she knows what's going on, right? Dick Cavett. I am sort of obsessed with watching on YouTube, like the old late night shows, because they were so edgy. And so like celebrities were so unscripted. And also,
that's what we were going to say. Wow. Okay.
They were so unscripted. Yeah. So if you watch like John Lennon and Yoko Ono on Dick Cavett, they're both sort of like chain smoking and like,
wow.
And Dick Cavett, he's a little bit of an awkward person, but he's really fascinated by different kinds of celebrity. So we have like musicians and writers and intellectuals. And it was just sort of like an interesting place to put, I think, Opal and Nev. I think they probably would have gone on his show. And then in terms of the other celebrities, I was just thinking, I don't know, like, honestly, I was just writing things that kind of made me laugh, like in a satirical way. And not laugh because it was like necessarily ha-ha funny, but because it felt like it was true for me, And so I was thinking about like what a Quentin Tarantino might think or say about like, one of the Opal Jewel songs that's sort of like a badass song and how he would use it in one of his movies, So
I'm telling you, the section with Quentin Tarantino is reason to buy the book. it's super small, but I just, without giving anything away, I just was like, of course he would. I was like, did you take something that Quentin Tarantino said in an interview and then just change what it was about? Because of course he said that.
Oh my gosh.
So many of those are just executed really, really well. And it makes it very fun. There's as much as it's an important story and you're telling a bold story and you're letting this incredibly fascinating woman take center stage. And all of that is great, but it's also just a really, really fun time. And it reads so quick and it's just a real delight. And so I loved it. I really appreciate the opportunity to get to talk to you about it. And my pitch for everybody that's watching, if you're on the fence about buying it, it is so good. It's really, really special. And again, not to be reductive of the quality of the work that you've done, but one of the characters in my book, Daisy Jones, is this disco singer named Simone. And I really loved writing her, but there's some limits to what I, as a white person, know about what it's like to be a Black woman in disco in the 70s. That's, not something that I'm privy to. And I always felt like I wanted more space for Simone to be able to tell a story. And this feels like that blown out times 1,000. Opal is another woman entirely, completely original, her own thing. She deserves her own book. It's really very good. And also, if you see in the chat, Book Soup has signed copies. You're going to want a signed copy of this. My last question, and then we'll start taking questions from people because I know we've got quite a bit here in the chat. What else are you reading?
So I am in the middle of a book that comes out in June, I believe it is, called The Other Black Girl by Zakiya Dalila Harris.
So good.
I've been very busy lately, but I'm trying to find little moments in the day. It's usually at the end of the night when I'm in bed and like dead tired, but I need to know what's going on because it's like thriller, it's like mystery, it's giving me so much. And I'm trying to sort of like thread the timelines together, but it's a super engaging and fun and funny read. I've really been enjoying that. I read a book that will be available in May, actually, called Revival Season by Monica West, which is a beautiful book about a young girl who is sort of grappling with faith and with her relationship with her father. So a very tender, very beautiful book. I am also sort of reading and savoring The Prophets by Robert Jones Jr., which is a beautiful lyrical book. And I'm just at the beginning of that, so I'm hoping to get into it a little bit more. And then I have to talk about my two Jacksonville homegirls, short story writers, Dontiel Moniz from Milk, Blood, Heat, beautiful collection all about girls. And Disha Filyar wrote a book called The Secret Lives of Church Ladies, which I could see there would be a story about Pearl in there. But it's all like it's like stories about Black women that I really recognize from growing up in the South. And so it's like hilarious and warm and tender and touching. It's a lot about mother-daughter relationships. So I've loved all of that.
Those are great. I meant for you to give recommendations to other people, but now I'm going to read those too. They all sound great. All right. So I'm going to pull up some audience questions here and let's see what people want to know from you. All right. Do you hide any secrets in your books that only certain people will be able to point out? That's a good one. Any secrets?
Yes.
Yeah.
That is such a great question. I have never been asked that.
That's a good one.
Okay. So there's like little references throughout that I think like people who are close to me will know. But there's a scene where Sunny is sort of at a like a bar around her office that her and her colleagues call a fair bar casually because it was like, and there was a bar at my old near my old office at Entertainment Weekly that we called that because it looked like the place where you like take someone you're having an affair with for like small plates at lunch, like, you know, just like, so that reference, my friends from Entertainment Weekly will absolutely get, but there are little Easter eggs through there. Yeah. That are like great. Small things.
Almost every single one of my books, some of the characters are named after my friends' kids. That's like a lot. At this point, I'm like, the book that I'm just finishing up to come out in a few years is like, my friend just had her third kid. And I'm like, are you having any more? Because I need to fit them in here. Like, there's not a lot more chances.
There were some minor characters in mind that I was naming after people and not even realizing it. Like Opal and Pearl have an Uncle Bill, and I also have an Uncle Bill. But it was like, I didn't realize I'd done that until my dad was like, "Oh, you're putting like our names in here," and I was like, "Oh,
and now you can't take it out."
Yeah, right.
That's great. Was there anything interesting that you ended up editing out of the final revival of Opal and Nev?
Yes. There is a whole conversation. Well, how do I put this? There's a whole lot of backstory. Sunny sharing her personal coming of age story. And it led into sort of a dialogue between her and her mother, who is sort of a reluctant witness.
Yes.
Who does not want to talk about this book.
Yes.
And so there is like a 40-page chunk that I absolutely love. I love this section of the book so much, but it just didn't belong in this book. It sort of slowed down the narrative a bit. It sort of slowed down the propulsion. And at the very smart suggestion of I have two editors, but my editor, Dawn Davis, made the suggestion. She was like, that's got to come out. And I took some time to hem and haw over it. And I kind of grieved for a little while. And then I decided she was right.
Brutal when they're right.
Brutal.
It's almost never happens that we're right. And
I know. Right.
You just have to entertain the idea that you might be right for a few days and then realize they're right. There's another question here, which adds an element to this. So the question is, were there things editors suggested you take out, but also were there things that your editors had suggested that you add that we can look for in this draft?
I think in sort of the earlier Nev parts, there was a little development of him on the front end that needed to be done. Talking about him sort of on the New York scene kind of floundering, you know, getting into that more was something that I ended up adding. I think that's probably the biggest thing. Yeah, I write really long, so mostly it's about like,
get it out.
We got to get this down somehow. We got to get this down.
Yeah. All right, let me see what else we've got here. There was one that I saw that I thought was great, and then I think it jumped. Let's see. We've got no, wait. Where did it go? Oh, here it is. Okay. Were there any research rabbit holes that you didn't expect to go down but were a lot of fun? That's a great question.
Ooh. So yes. I wanted Opal to travel. I wanted her to see a bit of the world. And so there is a chapter of Opal in Paris, and the timeline aligned just so that she was there for this real life event called the Battle of Versailles, which was a 1973 fashion show that pitted French designers versus American designers. And the American designers used like just a troupe of incredible Black models. And the French kind of put on this whole like elaborate show with Cinderella carriage, and Nureyev came out, and these backdrops and all these things. But the Black American women just came out and in 12 minutes, like they tore the house down. And I ended up doing quite a bit of research about the Battle of Versailles and how it came together. So I read a book by Robin Givhan that's called The Battle of Versailles. I watched a documentary about it, before quarantine, actually, my husband and I had an incredible opportunity to house sit for some friends of friends in Paris. So,
oh, wow.
So the whole Paris thing was, it was the research for that was very involved, but also researching venues like Max's Kansas City in New York. I got my hands on some great photography books and sort of looking at like everything from like the people who would be there to what people wore, all those things were just endlessly fascinating. And also like anytime I go on YouTube, it's a rabbit hole. Like again, watching like late night clips and old concert footage and all these things. It's just like, I love to do that anyway. So it was a great way to kind of procrastinate.
It's that thing of like, is this work? Does this count? It's like tangentially related, but I could easily argue that I might one day use it. So am I wasting my time or not? Yeah.
And you know what else is fascinating? Billboard charts. Like you can go back, going back and like seeing who was on the Billboard chart at this particular time in 1971. Like that was always really fun.
We another question's come in, and I think it's just the perfect one to end on. So when you wrap up a book, how do you say goodbye to your characters? So how has it felt? You obviously were working on this book for a really long time. It's something that clearly means a lot to you. How has it been to set the book down and to know that it's done?
I follow the Paris Review on Instagram. And sometimes they quote just they put up quote cards by writers, their interviews with writers. And I wish I could remember who it was. But I have always struggled with endings. And this piece of advice for me was like, this is how I want it to end. And it's like, your ending should feel like the beginning of another story.
Interesting.
So I wanted to have that feeling. I wanted the story to feel complete in some ways, but I wanted to sort of set up, the characters could go on another adventure, like they're starting something else. And so it's like, it's closure, but not in a way, so you can still like, the characters can stay with you and you can kind of imagine what they're doing next, and you can root for them if you root for them, or not if you don't. But I always wanted to end it so it felt like it was opening something new for them.
That's lovely. And the ending is pitch perfect and absolutely feels that way. Thank you so much for speaking with us tonight. I will speak for all of the people in the chat that this has been so much fun, and it's been so nice to get to hear some of the behind the scenes of how you came up with such a vivid and fascinating and just gripping novel. So thank you.
Taylor, thank you so much for being here with me. I know there's a lot of Taylor Jenkins Reid fans in the chat, and I'm so, so happy that both of our books exist in the world. And the last thing that I wanted to say to you was, I have been seeing so many comments that are like, we love both these books so much, and we feel like this is the start of a new genre in fiction.
Let's see, you know?
Yeah.
Anything's possible.
Thank you both for being here. Thanks for doing that. Taylor, thank you for interviewing. Dawnie, congratulations. The book is out in the world.
Thank you, Dan.
That's so great. And just to remind everybody before we close out here, you can purchase the book at the little green tab in the center bottom of the screen. Our copies do have a signed book plate with them, so keep that in mind. If you missed the beginning of the broadcast, after we save it, it takes about a minute, and then it will be saved in the archive, so you can go back and watch it from the beginning. Tell your friends, and thank you both for being here. And we'll see you all.
Thank you so much, Book Soup.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.